Welcome back to UN Consulting. Either you wonder why we are in the ocean today, or you are already familiar with the basics of McKinsey's problem-solving game, Embellos, which requires you to manage ecosystems, including marine ones, and which shall determine the theme of today's presentation. Now, when I first heard about the cool name Embellos in the context of marine environments, it made me think of the sunk city of Atlantis, until I figured it's just the name of the capability assessment software company with whom McKinsey has partnered to develop its digital assessment. Now let's dive right into it, and sorry for the pun. What are we going to talk about today? First, I would like you to understand the obvious and not so obvious reasons why consulting firms use digital assessments. Second, I will explain to you what role they play in your recruiting process. Third, I will teach you strategies that you can apply both to Embellos as well as other online assessments to improve your test performance. Fourth, we will go into the specifics of McKinsey Embellos games and discuss their solution strategies. Fifth, I'm going to share my advice with you on how to prepare for Embellos and, maybe most importantly, what not to do. Now, I keep saying that consulting life also is about having fun. And so I have embedded a little side story into this video. And if you want to find out how I navigate through all these obstacles in order to help you to land your dream job, then you have to watch this video until the very end. Now let's talk about why consulting firms like to rely on digital assessments. Because you will know it's not just McKinsey using them, there's also the BCG online test, the Bain online test, and actually many of the fishes in the pool such as Kearney or Wyman, they all like to rely on some sort of online test/digital assessment. And typically these tests combine some kind of online business case that you have to solve and you have to solve some math test, analytical test, logic test. And then there's now Embellos, which is really different in the sense that it takes out the assessment away or out from the business context and now makes you manage and save ecosystems. That's actually pretty cool. Now, there are obvious and not so obvious reasons why these digital assessments are used, and I really want you to be aware of them so that you understand the rules of the game. Talking about the obvious reasons, first, these online tests present another genuine step of the capability assessment process, in addition to what the CV screening and the business interviews already do, and that's fine. Also, these digital assessments can be done remotely. That means you don't have to be called into the office, and they can take place before any consultants needs to get involved for the interview. As such, they're also extremely cheap. Because no HR person has to be involved, no consultant has to be involved, just you and the machine, and the software then generates a fully automated report for the HR department. Arguably, they also present the only step in the recruiting process that is completely objective in the sense that there's no human interference. Because there's no person making a personal judgment about you. It's just basically your score, and the assessment is really the same for everybody. Coming to the not so obvious reasons, I mean, you are aware that consulting firms receive thousands of applications, and it's really not easy to take a decision who should be advanced to the interviewing stage on the basis of just all these top CVs. So these online tests serve as a great tool for HR departments to filter out a large chunk of applicants at this early stage of a recruiting process. Second, they are also very transparent to the applicant in the sense that after a business case interview, you may be able to have a call with your interviewer for feedback and get a better understanding. You may even try to argue with the result if you don't like it. But with these online tests, it's really a black box, right? So you will get told yes or no. Typically, you won't get told any score, and you have to accept it, and you can't debate it in any way. And thirdly, that's a claim I can't back up, but I have a hypothesis that these threshold levels or cutoff scores that they can be adjusted. So in times when many consultants are being hired, then you can lower it so to admit more consultants to the interviewing stage. And if actually there's a time of economic crisis where you need to hire fewer new consultants, you can actually make it harder and nobody on the outside knows what's going on. Turning to Embellos and why it's so cool. I mean, first, it's unique in the sense that while other consulting firms still make you solve business cases and math tests, in Embellos, you now have to manage ecosystems. That's actually pretty cool. And this also serves as a nice marketing or branding tool for scientists who may be less enthusiastic about increasing profit and care more about saving the environment. Also, there has always been this discussion about the business bias in that sense that candidates from top business schools, they probably have an advantage in terms of a business lingo for all these business case interviews. And so the interviewers have to adjust their level of difficulties in these interviews. Not so much for Embellos, because everybody's equal. Nobody has this background that can actually help. And then, of course, you must know that McKinsey also nowadays does many digital improvement projects. And so this Embellos digital assessment is very techy. It's absolutely digital, and it uses artificial intelligence. So in that sense, also great branding, both in front of clients and in front of new hires. Last but not least, given this assignment is so different from what is out there, it's actually not straightforward to prepare for the test, although we will be getting there. Now, so much on the rationale behind these digital assessments, and let's now talk about the role these assignments play in your recruiting process. Right. So the recruiting process typically works as follows. First, people hand in their application documents, and then people in HR screen them. And on the basis of the CV, it's decided if a candidate should be invited to take part in the digital assessment or not. And you can be a bit more generous here because even if you're not fully convinced about the CV, you can still give a person a try and to see maybe he or she makes the cutoff score. And really, this digital assessment takes a role of a gatekeeper here. Only if you have passed the assessment, you will be advanced to the interviewing stage with like 3, 4, 5 rounds of business case interviews. Having said that, there are exceptions from this process. So maybe you are aware that before using the Embellos test, McKinsey had its McKinsey problem-solving test serving the same purpose, basically. And in the US and in the UK, passing the problem-solving test was a precondition for entering the interviewing stage. And in the German office, it was handled differently in the sense that the problem-solving test took place in parallel to the business case interviews. That meant a candidate who maybe didn't perform so well at their test could still balance out by making a good personal impression at the business case interviews. And this scheme has partially survived. So now with Embellos at present, McKinsey asks you to take the Embellos test and then in parallel runs one business case phone interview with you. Again, which I think plays a bit to your favor, and you may inquire what are the exact conditions / process in your country. I would like to stress that these online tests are there to make a yes or no decision, either you pass or you don't. So this stands in some notable contrast to the business case interviews, where the difference between an excellent business case interview performance and a good one really can make a difference for the outcome. Maybe, again, there's a bit of a difference for the German office, where I just explained the Embellos test is evaluated at least partially in parallel with the business case interviews. So much on the role of digital assessments in your recruiting process. And I hope you found this video useful so far. The best is yet to come. And if you like the video, what else to say? Now let's move on to discuss things you can do during the test to improve your test performance. Now first, let's make sure that you get the basics right, and these apply to all online assessments, not just Embellos. Should go without saying, but please make sure that you have a good and stable internet connection. You really don't want to argue with HR departments over a technical fuck up. Of course, make sure you are in a quiet environment, nobody disturbs you, and put your phone on silence. Have pen and paper ready so that you can draw some maps or make auxiliary calculations where needed. You can also take your calculator with you. Even if you don't need it, maybe it makes you feel safer. In Embellos, you actually may use it sometimes. And watch the time. So the classic, don't get hung up too much on a single task or a single assignment. More stuff that you can do to positively influence your test performance. First, make sure that you understand the instructions. And I can share a personal story here. So when I was taking the McKinsey problem solving test together with the interviews in the McKinsey office, I actually asked at the beginning a question how my false answers would be counted. I mean, would they reduce my score, or would false answers just be neutral? And it caused some confusion among consultants, but ultimately I got an answer and could adjust my solving strategy. And of course, also for online assessment, I mean, really read these instructions carefully. Also for Embellos, may use for a tutorial, time doesn't count, so that's very important. Also watch out for traps in questions. The McKinsey problem solving test was, for me, infamous for having trap questions. I really didn't like it because it would kind of try to steer your mind off track or be a bit confusing. So watch out for that. Also, typically in all these assessments, you get overloaded either by information in Embellos or just by many questions that you hardly can completely solve. So maybe easier said than done, but practice and get used to discarding the unimportant and focus. And then also, especially in Embellos, you won't have enough time to understand the whole thing. And that's actually a key consultant ability. Try to get a grips of the situation and then be comfortable about acting under incomplete information. And last but not least, I already mentioned it, have pen and paper ready and use it for calculations or drawing trees. You don't have to do everything in your head. So much on strategies that you can apply to most online assessments out there. Nobody's coming this time, so I think we can just proceed with helping you master the specific challenges of McKinsey's Embellum problem-solving game. Let's start with a general overview. So there are currently 4 ecosystem games out there, and you will be dealt 2 of them. And for these, you have time to solve of about 60 till 75 minutes or so. And importantly, the tutorial time does not count. So please make sure you read all the instructions carefully. Maybe you can already take some notes. Maybe you already observe some of the screens and can copy some criteria or whatever. And also you can take a break in between the games. Very notably, Embellos does not only take into account your results, but also the process, how you got there. And that makes it closer to the classic business case studies, where not only your recommendation matters, but also the way you got there. And so it's also different to, say, multiple choice tests where just the right answer counts, which also could have been guessed. And how does Embellos track this? Well, it tracks your mouse movements, clicks, and keystrokes to check if you went through a logical reasoning process. Sounds a bit scary, but don't get crazy over it. Just go with it. You can't change it. It's fine. Also, don't bother asking people about their answers they put or which selections they have made, because for each game, the parameter values are generated randomly again. Moving to fun and games. So in the first game available, you have to set up an ecosystem. And that game can take place either in a marine environment or in a mountain ridge. And you'll be dealt with a list of characteristics such as depth, temperature, and salinity for the coral reef, or altitude, precipitation, and pH level for the mountain environment. And when you are confronted with 30 to 40 species that come with living condition requirements, food source, energy balance, and then you are confronted with two tasks. First, you have to select a suitable location for your species within that ecosystem, and then you have to select 8 species from the larger set that form a common food chain and can survive together. How to solve this game? So at first you may feel overwhelmed because you will be given a vast amount of data, and of course this is part of the challenge. So really apply your consulting skills here, and don't get bogged too much down in the details. Instead, try keeping the bird's perspective and screen for the data. In the beginning, you will be given this list of ecosystem criteria, and you have to select a location within the ecosystem that is suitable for most of your species. So quickly screen for the criteria that actually matter for your species, because typically some of these criteria don't really matter because all your species are fine with whatever. And once you have selected a location that is actually suitable for most of the species in the set given to you, then you actually have to select a subset of 8 species that are compatible in terms of their food demands. And so they may feed on sunlight, they may be herbivores or carnivores or whatever. And here you can use a pen and paper to draw kind of a chain, how these animals link together, typically 3 or 4 layers. And you also have to watch out for their energy balance in terms of calories provided and calories consumed, because for some of the species you may be given just the amount provided per single species, but you have a larger population in that species group, so maybe you have some calculation to make sure everything adds up. Here, of course, you can use your calculator. And then hopefully you have selected 8 species that together can survive for the long term. In the second game, you actually have to defend a plant on a checkerboard against invaders attacking it. And there's 3 rounds of battles, or 3 little games, separate games, with several turns each, during which you can decide on an action you want to take. And to defend your plant, you can deploy defender animals or place obstacles. Now the issue with that game is that you are provided with some vague information on the powers of your defender army and obstacles, but you actually have to find out by trial and error what happens if you make use of them. And as well, you have to kind of observe how your opponents behaves, so that you can anticipate their next moves. And this is what the game wants you to do, right? That's also why there's 3 games, and each time it becomes a bit more advanced. It's 3 games where you actually can apply your early learnings and show Embellos that you understand and process your previous experiences. So ultimately, by the end of the 3 games, you should have a good grips of it and ensure that your plant survives for as long as possible. Good luck. There are 2 further games out there that have so far appeared less frequently. In one game, you are supposed to mitigate the effects from a disaster, and the second, treat a disease. So in the disaster scenario, actually you first have to again screen for conditions in your ecosystem and see how the current parameter values compare with descriptions of disasters that may have occurred in your ecosystem, and find out which one it has been. And once you have done so, then you have to move your surviving species to a safer location within the ecosystem. And here again, you have to compare their living condition requirements with the options out there. In that sense, similar to the first game. In the other game, where you actually have to first identify a disease that has hit your animal population. So you have to check for the symptoms out there and see how they match descriptions of diseases out there. And once you have identified it, then you have to select remedies based on the type and the severity of the disease observed, and also the needs of your infected species. One more thing, after you have completed your assignments, you may get asked if you have gaming experience. What does that mean? McKinsey wants to know if you have experience in playing computer games or love playing complex board games where you have to deal with resource management and so on, because it probably fears that such people may have a slight advantage over other candidates, similar to the case with the business case studies where people from business schools probably have a slight advantage over people with other academic backgrounds. And I'm not sure what I would answer to this question if you have such a background, because what does McKinsey want to do with these answers? Of course, it wants to find out if there's a systemic bias in the data for people with gaming experience. And so then it can, if that's the case, it can either discard the Bellows game, which is probably not going to happen very soon, or it may find a way to adjust the score for people with such a background. Not sure if it's to your advantage, so just as a note to you. Now we have discussed what you should do when taking the Bellows assessment. Now let's move on to discuss how you should prepare for the Bellows test and also what not to do, because there's some advice out there that I disagree with. Okay, I start getting a bit uncomfortable here. Let's move to the Yuan Consulting headquarters. Much better now. So let's talk about how to prepare for Bellows. I said earlier it's not straightforward to prepare for Bellows. Still, there's a couple of things that you can do and some things that I think you should not do. So we just discussed that you may have an advantage if you have gaming experience. And I see that some people now suggest that you should now start playing computer games and board games to get better at it. Honestly, guys, now you're preparing for interviews. They come up in a couple of weeks. Now it's not the time to play computer games, but it's time to do your other homework, okay? A second thing, when you repeatedly see people mention these official evaluation criteria of Bellows, so you may see this list. For record, this is the list with these 5 official Bellows performance evaluation criteria. They actually stem from an article that Bellows published on its cooperation with McKinsey. And you find the link in the description below if you want to read about it. But honestly, don't bother much with it. Don't spend much time on it. Because ultimately, knowing these 5 criteria in more detail doesn't really help you, because you don't know how the software is programmed to track this in your mouse clicks and mouse movement behavior. So here you're really at risk of over-engineering and getting bogged down in something that is not really useful, so spend your time elsewhere. Now let's talk about the things that you actually can do to prepare for Bellows. I mentioned earlier that prior to Bellows, McKinsey used its proprietary McKinsey problem-solving test. And back then, McKinsey was interested in the same capabilities and talents in its candidates as it is nowadays. So it makes absolute sense for you to get your hands on the former McKinsey problem-solving test examples given out to applicants for preparation. I'm not sure I can share the links here, but you can find them if you search for McKinsey problem-solving test, Fiji Cola and Kosher Franks. And then make yourself familiar with what McKinsey demands from you. Another thing you can do, leverage the free online resources out there. Some consulting firms offer some free online business cases. I mean, for instance, BCG. I mean, at least it gets you used to taking tests online. If you have a lot of time at your hand, then of course you can do GRE task, solve GMAT task, sort of IQ, logic tests and so on. But honestly, I urge you really follow the 80-20 rule here. And what does it mean in this context? So I suggest and recommend that you binge practice business cases because ultimately this will lead you to the highest reward. Business case interviews make up the largest part of the recruiting process, and they apply to all consulting firms out there. When you practice business cases, you also improve your logical reasoning skills, your structuring skills, your math skills. So it will benefit you both for the business case interviews and the online assessments alike. Embellows, yes, it's McKinsey, so of course you want to perform well there, but also Embellows applies to only one consulting firm. And when you practice business cases, you improve your skills for all sort of assignments. So if I were you, I would spend at maximum 10 to 20% of my time on preparing for the online assessments, and the rest and bulk of your time on binge practicing business cases. Great, now we are almost at the end. Oh, let me take this with me. Now we are safe. Oh no. Well, there are many obstacles on the path to getting into McKinsey, and I'm here to help you on Yuan Consulting. If you have watched this video until here, please leave a like, leave a comment if you want to share an experience about Embellows or the other online tests, and subscribe to the Yuan Consulting channel for more quality content to come. See you soon.